We're continuing this Neighboring Revisited series, going back to look at some of the material we covered several months ago and try to apply it in some fresh ways. Today we're going to be looking at loving neighbors in a post-Christian world. And so, loving neighbors in a post-Christian world. And we'll review some of the things we touched on last time. And I'll refer you can go watch the previous class if you want some of the details, because we're not going to dive into everything. But let me pray, and then we'll jump in. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity to review this material, this opportunity to be sharpened as neighbors, to learn how to better love our neighbors, how to be better witnesses of Jesus Christ and his glorious gospel. We pray for your help today, that you would help us to think through these topics and how they might work themselves out in our lives. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so today we're talking about loving neighbors in a post-Christian world. I'm not going to dive deep into what post-Christian world is, but let me just say a few things about it. We're talking about loving neighbors who may think, act, believe, live differently than we do because they have not been significantly shaped by Christian thinking and ideas. So there never was a time where, the whole worldview of the country was shaped by Christianity, but there was a time where there was a lot of shared assumptions, and that is becoming increasingly less so the case today. And so for many of our neighbors, their pressing question is not, how can I go to heaven when I die? And we kind of assume that is what everybody's thinking. Now, you probably know many people for whom that is a kind of a pressing question, people with, certain religious backgrounds and that kind of thing. But for many of our neighbors, that is just not the puzzle they're trying to solve. And so they are not going throughout their day wondering, I wish I would just encounter somebody who could tell me how to get to heaven. Some of them are, but we should actually be, and we might think, oh man, that makes being a Christian witness really difficult. But we should actually be pretty thankful for the fact that that's less so people's thinking, because that's a very truncated version of the gospel. How do I go to heaven when I die? That's not really the focus of the gospel. The gospel is bigger than that. It's deeper than that. It's more radical than that. It's about how God has acted through Jesus Christ to renew and restore his broken creation. And yes, heaven, new earth is a part of that. But just the simple, how do I get there, is not really the focus. So the challenge for us as trying to be loving, good neighbors in a post-Christian world is showing in word and deed, so how we live, but also, the way we speak, the kinds of conversations we have with people, that the gospel truly is good news, that it's God's solution to what is broken about us and broken about this world, and that the gospel is really a part of God's plan for human flourishing, for the flourishing of his human image bearers, for the flourishing of all of creation, actually. And so last week we talked about a few different aspects of loving neighbors, that loving people well requires valuing their dignity as image bearers. So maybe you remember that point last week, that it's kind of a starting point for us in being loving neighbors, is seeing the people with whom we work, the literal neighbors, the people who live next door to us, and others as image bearers. And so inherently, they inherently have value, and related to that, so not only valuing their dignity, but affirming their dignity as image bearers. So Craig dove into that a bit last week. And a key point that comes out of that, and it'll relate to some of the material we cover today, is distinguishing between acceptance and approval. So, very important, right? Because there's a push in just kind of our culture today that to define love as unqualified approval of everything. So, in order for me to be loving toward Craig, I have to just, without qualification, um, just approve of everything he believes, does, and so forth. And that if you have any different, you kind of disagree with something, you're not loving. And we can make a distinction between acceptance. We can accept people as image bearers who have value. We can affirm the good qualities, the vestiges, I think is the phrase Craig used, of image bearing in people, that though we are fallen and broken, the image of God has not been completely obliterated in us. And so we'll see common grace good in our neighbors, in our world, and we should affirm that. We can affirm that. But we can accept them as image bearers without approving of everything they do or believe. And so that's an important distinction. It's a difficult line to walk, and there's going to be tugs, one way or the other. It's a difficult balance to get, but it's essential for us as for trying to love our neighbors. Now, today what we're going to be talking about is two things, really. One, empathy and sharing truth, and those two go together. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is hospitality. And we'll spend more time on the first one than the second one, so just a heads up there. The first one, showing empathy and sharing truth. So these two things go together, but we're going to talk about them separately. I'm going to talk about empathy first, then I'm going to talk about truth. We want to grow in both of these. So they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. They go together. One without the other is a distortion. One without the other actually hinders and compromises our witness as neighbors. So they're both needed. And empathy first. Let's talk about empathy. Loving our neighbors requires empathy. What is empathy? Let me just give you a kind of a dictionary definition. Not kind of, it is a dictionary definition. The action, and this is empathy, the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. So, there's a lot of elements to that definition, but to summarize, it's this idea of being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Now, obviously, there's limitations for how much we can do that, but it's this idea of really trying to understand where somebody's coming from, their concerns, their cares, what they value, what's important to them, how they respond to various things. Here's another quote about what empathy requires of us. To be empathetic, we must have the ability to step outside of ourselves and into another's private world. We can experience empathy at different times, in various places, and in many forms. And here's some examples. When we get teary during a sad movie, that never happens to me. I'm kind of joking, but not joking a whole lot. When we feel elated or disappointed with the fortunes of our favorite team. That's a funny one, right? You're watching your favorite sports team. I think of the Lakers. They were terrible last season. They're just like miserable to watch. And you watch them play. I'm not playing. My career's not on the line. I'm not like one of the owners of the team and have this business relationship with the team, but I watch them, and when they play poorly, it like crushes me, and I feel bad. It's this weird, experience of empathy. when we enter fully into the meaning of a work of art, and, and when we imagine the deep hurt of another's loss of a loved one. So, you know, a friend's relative dies, and even though you may not even have known the person who died, you know, you have this feeling because you love your friend, you kind of enter into their sorrow and their grief, and it impacts you as well. So this idea of empathy, I like what this author said. It's the ability to step outside of ourselves, which we all know. Talking about empathy, this is just like all of life, not just trying to be a loving neighbor to non-Christian friends. This is all of life. That task of stepping outside of ourselves, that's so hard, isn't it? I mean, we want to just be about us and care about our own private world, but empathy is this act of love where we try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. Couple of verses real quick. You can jot these down if you want. Colossians 3:12, Galatians 6:2, just some of the biblical call to empathy. Colossians 3, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, and the text goes on. But that idea of compassionate hearts, so which entails thinking about what others feel. So trying to understand, how a certain situation is impacting them. And Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Now, immediate context, obviously, Paul's talking about life within the church and our call as brothers and sisters to support each other, care for each other. But it really illustrates what loving another person entails. Tim Keller says, you cannot help with a burden unless you come very close to the burdened person. So in the same way, a Christian must listen and understand and physically, emotionally, spiritually take up some of the burden with the other person. So that's challenging, right? We each have our own burdens, our own struggles, and then to try to enter into someone else's and take on the emotional weight of that, maybe the practical complications of that is difficult. But it's a part of what it means to be a loving neighbor who demonstrates empathy for others. And so, we've quoted Rosaria Butterfield several times throughout these classes because she has a great book on neighboring. Gospel Comes with a House Key. And she says this about this idea of coming close to share someone's burden. She says, pray that you will be a safe person to hear the burdens of your neighbor's hearts. So you all have probably encountered other people where you share something about what's going on in your life, something that's burdening you, something that's weighing heavy on you, and they just kind of, either they're indifferent or they just give you some little superficial, well, you just need to do X, or you just need to trust God more. and just kind of, they're not empathetic, right? They're not safe. And Rosaria is saying, pray that you would be the kind of person that others find to be safe. Like that they can come to you with whatever it is and know that there's going to be empathy on the other end. And she says that she asks herself, have I made myself safe to share the real hardships of your day-to-day living? And she talks about metaphorically having daggers in her hands because that she may not even realize. She may not even recognize that she's got these weapons in her hands that can do such violence to other people because of her Christian context, meaning, there's certain ways we're accustomed to talking to each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, or certain perspectives we have as Christians that our non-Christian neighbors don't share. And that doesn't mean we don't ever talk about those things, but we need to be sensitive to, this will come up in a few moments, if there's not a good relationship with that person, talking about these hard things can actually come across as very lacking empathy, as very the opposite of loving. And so she says, am I safe? And if not, then why not? So in other words, the privilege of speaking into someone's life is something that has to be earned, not assumed. So maybe this is true of you. I know it's the case for me. I kind of assume that because I'm a Christian, because I'm a pastor, that I can just kind of dish out, biblical truth without giving much thought to, is it, and we're gonna talk about this a little more in a moment, but is this the right time? Is this the right context? Do I have a relationship with this person to such a degree that they can actually hear this as coming from a heart of compassion and empathy? But I just kind of assume, I can just say things because it's true. And we're going to talk about that more. But that being able to speak into somebody's life, it is a privilege that has to be earned. And so one other brief point before I have a couple questions for us to kind of think about. So we need to cultivate empathy in order to be loving neighbors in our world, in order to be beautiful kind of reflections of Christ and his gospel. We need to cultivate empathy. And how do we do that? It's easy for me to stand up here and say, be empathetic. But how do we cultivate that? I'm going to put it, I'm not going to give you the story, but this comes from the TV series Ted Lasso, or it's adapted from that. We cultivate empathy by learning to be more curious and less judgmental. So more curious, less judgmental. Now, I want you to think about, before I go into more detail, there's probably aspects of that sentence that kind of irk you a little bit, right? That kind of make you think, that doesn't sound quite right. For example, being less judgmental. What do I mean by that? I don't mean abandoning biblical morality. I don't mean a jettisoning, the biblical standards. And we just kind of, what I mentioned earlier, the approval of all things. We just kind of have this, hands off. We don't ever have standards. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is something, I know I struggle with this. I would assume others do as well. I'm talking about condemning someone without even without even trying to know them. So you just kind of make this split second, this person, I look at them, I hear the way they talk, I know a little bit about them, or maybe I don't know much at all about them, but I just make this snap judgment. And I put them in this category. They are this, and therefore, I don't really need to put in any effort to love them because they are X. And you just kind of quickly, your heart just kind of calcifies and hardens, and I don't need to let that person's cares, concerns, needs really affect me at all. So instead of going that route, cultivating curiosity about others. Curiosity moves you toward other people and helps you better understand them. So, rather than that snap judgment, asking myself and trying to figure out, who are they really? What's their story? What have been some of the significant, experiences in their life that have really shaped who they are and their perspective and outlook and their concerns? What's important to them? What makes them tick? Those are all questions that help you, they move you toward the person, Rather than just kind of standing back and assuming you know everything about them, it raises, you start asking these questions, and other related questions come up. And then, unless you just turn all that off, what happens? Well, you have to get to know them because you want to know the answers to these things, and then you start to learn more about them, and that curiosity can lead to empathy as you begin to see this is a human being, this is a fellow image bearer. What have you found to be difficult about being more curious and less judgmental? Showing empathy. I can give you a few of mine, and maybe it'll spark some thoughts. A few things. The time required. So this, cultivating empathy, developing curiosity, it takes time, right? A lot of us, I know for myself, kind of very driven by the clock, and I've only got so much time. And, to really get to know this person, it's going to require me to slow down, and for me to move beyond just kind of, I'm thinking of a coworker where you just kind of say, good morning, sit down at your desk, put your head down, do your work. On your way out, say, see you later. It's going to require an investment of time. An emotional toll. I've got my own struggles. The people that are closest to me have their own struggles. There's a lot of emotional investment there. Do I really want to bring in, somebody else's mess into my emotional orbit? Lifestyle, just kind of exposure to lifestyles with which I disagree, that are wrong, that are sinful, that are unhealthy. That's tough. What have been some of the things you've struggled with in trying to cultivate empathy, learning to be more curious? Oh, I forgot the microphone. Kevin.
Not giving the impression that you are perfect. And, you have to be open and vulnerable to show yourself as well.
Yeah, and we probably can fear if we communicate to others that we don't, or we're not perfect, that they might, then maybe it discounts the truth we want to share with them, right? Like, oh, well, this person struggles too. They don't have the answers. Yeah, that's tough. Trying not to come across as some kind of self-righteous religious person. Marcia, I think you had your hand up.
I think what I struggle with is I love to just fix people's problems. And so instead, I have to step back and say, we need to listen. Listen
Yeah.
before you speak. And I struggle with that.
Yeah, that's kind of the time issue, right? It's easier to just step in with, the 3 quick fixes.
But we were using that. So this one, and I know it wasn't the one with the tape, it was this one. Should I just test it? Is that? Check, check. But this one's on 9, right? Check, check, check. See, like this is this. Check, 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 check. Check, check, check. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Okay.
This is the one that's coming in on 9.
And this one's on 1, which is what we want, yeah. Check, 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 check. This one. Check, check, check. Check, 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 check. Okay. Do you want to try it?
Yeah, the first thing you mentioned is very big. You know, someone else's struggle might not be your struggle, and so and this applies, you know, trying to love people within the church, outside of the church. You know, someone else's struggle is just something you don't struggle with, and you're like, that's so ridiculous, that's so easy. Why is that such a big deal for you? But you know, learning to kind of pause and listen and really understand it's not a big deal for me, but but it is for this person, and vice versa. You know, there's things that are difficult for me that are not difficult for somebody else. So we do have a mic now, so I'm going to ask when you do give input that you talk into the mic that way for the recording and also for the live stream. People can hear what you're saying. So I'm going to try to be empathetic and understand your fear, but I'll try to be more curious about why you're afraid to talk into the mic. Okay, so, you know, there's all kinds of reasons it's difficult to develop empathy. A few others I thought of, this is kind of related to the time one. You know, it takes time away from church activities. You know, if you're going to cultivate these meaningful relationships with neighbors, you're gonna have to, there's trade-offs. I can't be a part of every, you know, church event throughout the week, or I'm gonna have to decide, you know, which to prioritize. It feels wrong to empathize when immoral behavior is involved. So that's a challenge, right? This person, you know, maybe you have this unmarried coworker who sleeps with their partner, and then there's some kind of relational struggle, and they're telling you about it, and it's kind of hard for you. You know, you're thinking, well, they're living this sinful life. I mean, what do they expect? But remember what we talked about, the difference between acceptance and approval. And then also, Craig mentioned last week, learning to discern the positive image-bearing impulses behind their behavior. So yes, the way they've pursued, they have this relationship that's immoral, but you know, they're struggling with the fact that there's relational discord. And so because they are people created in the image of God, they recognize that even though they don't know maybe the ultimate reasons, they recognize that God hasn't created us to live at odds with other people. He's created us for these relationships of mutual fellowship and love and intimacy. And so when there's discord in a relationship, it's very jarring. And that might be a way in to cultivating some empathy for this person. What has helped you cultivate empathy and curiosity? Rosie. Hold on. I can't let you off easy.
If you're like going through the same struggles as somebody, you like empathize with them in it.
Yeah. Yeah, so when it's a shared struggle, that's big, you know, because it's kind of the barrier to empathy is a lot lower because you know what it's like. See, now everybody's scared. Gracie.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I have a friend who struggles with jealousy, and a lot of the time I just say, it's okay, just take your time, you know. It'll, because she'll see something and she'll be like, I can't do that good. Why do they get the attention? And I'll be like, you know, I'll try to give her attention because she likes it. But how would I say help her with this struggle? Because it comes and goes in like waves and stuff, and I don't know how to help her avoid situations like that.
Yeah, that's tough. Maybe we could talk after about some ways to try to help them. But even what you said you're doing, where you don't just blow up on them, you know, or blow up at them. You know, why are you so jealous? That's so, you know, and you just kind of give it to them. Now, maybe at some point they need some tough conversation, but being someone they can come to with their struggles is good. I'll just mention a couple things. Thank you, so I don't have to keep.
Yeah, I
walking.
can run the mic.
a couple things I found helpful related to last week's lesson, just cultivating that awareness of seeing other people as image bearers. So not an other, not a whatever category you want to put them in, but seeing them as a fellow image bearer. And then just learning to be a good conversationalist, which is I find difficult. I've got kind of my standard set of questions, and once I'm through those, I'm kind of like, all right, what do I do now? But learning to ask questions and then just listen. Marcia mentioned the listening. I tell people, or I don't tell a lot of people this, I tell Stephanie this, that as a pastor, I've learned if you just listen, you learn, you get all your many of your questions answered. If you can just be the kind of person that people feel like they can talk to and they're listening, I don't have to press for a lot of follow-up. They just kind of tell you lots of things. So asking good questions and then learning to listen. Now, I'm realizing we're going more slowly than we should, but related to showing empathy is sharing truth. So we can't just be people who sympathize, empathize with others and their struggles and just kind of leave it at that. Now, in some relationships, that may be the only, we're a listening ear, we're a sympathetic friend, that may be as far as it goes. But ideally, empathy and truth are joined together. And Tim Keller says this, he's talking about, this is in his book about marriage, but he says, love without truth is sentimentality. It supports and affirms us, but keeps us in denial about our flaws. Truth without love is harshness. It gives us information, but in such a way that we cannot really hear it. God's saving love in Christ, however, is marked by both radical truthfulness about who we are, and yet also radical unconditional commitment to us. So truth, love together. And when we talked about this, I say we, I was on sabbatical, but the royal we. When we talked about this before, three kind of key, no, I don't think I'm royalty. Three key points. Love shares truth about image bearing. Love shares truth about the gospel. And truth must be shared in a loving way. Now, I'm just going to summarize the first two with like a couple sentences. Go back and watch the class if you missed it or you just want to review in details. I'm going to summarize the first two and then kind of focus in on that third one about truth must be shared in a loving way. When we talk about love shares the truth about image bearing, what we're talking about is getting beyond just being kind of behavior police. It's easy for us in interacting with neighbors to see, things about their lifestyle that, are not good, unhealthy, whatever, and just kind of focus on those, and we tend to label behaviors bad or good, and then we think, okay, in order to be, evangelistic, I just need to convince them that they're a bad person. And obviously understanding why the gospel is good news involves understanding what the bad news is. But we tend to become just kind of morality police, and it's divorced from the bigger context of us being human beings created in the image of God and designed to function within this vocation as image bearers, which involves knowing God, being known by God, reflecting who God is out into the world, priest kings, all kinds of things that we've covered before, and trying to help people see that the more fundamental issue is not, for example, someone's big problem is not that they have a substance abuse problem. That's significant. It impacts their life. It impacts their family's lives. But the deeper issue for that person and for all of us is that we've turned away from the God for whom we were created, and we're these distorted image bearers now. We're not functioning as priest kings any longer, the way that God designed us to be. And it's an idolatry problem. We've turned from the worship of the true God and made these maybe his gifts, relationships, food, other things. We've turned those things into idols, and the behaviors that we see are just the symptoms of the deeper issue. So we're trying to help people understand that God's not just this taskmaster who gives us a list of things to do or not do, and the whole point of life is to just keep the rules. Now, God is a just lawgiver, but it's all within the context of this bigger picture of being God's image bearer. So love shares the truth about image bearing. Love shares the truth about the gospel. We're wanting to try to show the gospel, help people see that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the truest, deepest answer to the struggles they have, to the problems they have. So again, I just summarize those in a couple sentences. Go back and watch, the class. I think it's week 8 of the neighboring class, where Craig went into more detail on that. I want to kind of zero in for the moment because it relates so closely to empathy. On truth must be shared in a loving way. So we want to be truth tellers. We want to be people who speak the truth of the gospel, who are about that. But I have noticed in my own life, I've been around the church world for a long time, so I've noticed it in many Christians. We seem to be a little confused on this point. We tend to think that as long as what I'm saying is true, it doesn't matter how I say it, when I say it, where I say it, why I say it. In other words, we think that the only thing that matters is the content of what we say. Is it true, accurate, factual, theologically correct, and so forth? When in reality, that's essential, that aspect, the content, true content, but also in all of our speech, whether it's within the context of marriage or parent-child relationship or just friendships within the church or interacting with non-Christian neighbors, not only is it the content that matters, it's the motivation for why I'm saying what I'm saying. I could be saying something very true to someone about a sinful behavior, but I'm doing it because they just disgust me and I don't like them and I want to make them feel bad. So the motivation matters. The goal and purpose matters. What am I trying to achieve with this speech? Is it a good and godly and biblical goal and purpose? The manner matters. And all of us know this, right? In our closest relationships, someone, comes to us with something and everything they say to us is true and accurate but they're just, they're either boiling with rage or they're condescending or just kind of sarcastic or whatever. It makes it really difficult to receive the message they're bringing to you, right? Because the manner matters. And so, if we take seriously this call to share truth in a loving way, and so addressing the content and the motivation and goals and manner, we'll probably talk a lot less if we take this seriously. One author, let me read you a quote from Andrew Walker, and in this context of speaking truth in love, he says, we must speak truth in love. At the same time, speaking truth is not necessarily loving. That's an interesting statement. It's not necessarily loving. There is a way of speaking biblical truth that is the opposite of loving. Truth that is the opposite of loving. Speaking that is motivated, so motivation here, motivated by self-righteousness, pride, fear, or a desire to win an argument. It is loving to speak truth, but only if we speak truth lovingly. It's an interesting way to put it, right? And then he quotes Proverbs 15:11, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And then he goes on to talk about, sharing truth in a loving way. He says, no arrogance, no dismissal, no harsh words, no trite sayings that gloss over deeply personal experiences, no jokes, including those made behind someone's back. So, truth, it is loving to speak truth, but only if the truth is spoken in a loving way. Now, obviously, a loving way doesn't necessarily mean all, kind of rainbows and just you don't ever say anything tough or difficult, but, right motivation and goal. Rosaria, again, says, your relationship with others must be as strong as your words. So connecting with the empathy part, truth, especially difficult truth, offensive truth, when we're talking about loving our neighbors, it really needs to come in the context of some kind of significant relationship. Your relationship with others must be as strong as your words. The balance cannot tip here. Having strong words and a weak relationship with your neighbor is violent. And I'm sure, many of you have experienced that kind of thing. Someone who doesn't really care to give you the time of day, but then when they see something they don't like, about your yard or your life or the way you dress or the way you look, and they just, hey, your yard's a mess, and maybe it really is a mess and you need to spend more time, but they don't care to know you at all. She says, strong words, weak relationship with your neighbor is violent. It captures the violent carelessness of our social media-infused age. That is not how neighbors talk with each other. And, you see this, Twitter, Facebook, people, just blasting each other. And they may be talking about things that should be talked about, important issues, but it's just kind of this, you're just writing to a screen, not to real human beings. You don't have a relationship with them, and you say all kinds of things online to them that you would never say face to face because you don't know them. So being able to speak truth in a loving way, just for a few minutes here, what misunderstandings maybe about showing empathy and sharing truth have you had? Maybe they were addressed, months ago. Maybe things are coming to light now. Or what have been some misunderstandings you've had about empathy and truth?
I will awkwardly stand here.
I kind of already said this, but I'll get to Stephanie in a moment. I kind of already said this, but I think for me, for a long time, I thought, as long as what I'm saying is true, it really that's all that's the big concern. Is what I'm saying right, and not realizing, there's a right time to speak truth. A fitting word. There's a right way to go about it. It might not be a direct frontal assault. It might be, just kind of a backdoor approach. Where you at?
Well, if I sit down.
Can I respond too?
Yes, and then I'll have Stephanie.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
One of the things I find tricky about it is trying to take the time to learn, to listen, to love, but then things are coming at you that say you don't agree with, or the person's kind of like, right? And where's that line between not being dishonest and waiting for the right time? Because you can tell it's really early in a conversation. It's not the time for me to be correcting something, but then also wanting to ensure that I'm not being deceitful, that later they're like, wait, what? You think what? Mm-hmm. So just that balance, I think, gets tricky in conversations because especially if someone's lifestyle is very different than yours, there's all these words coming at you, and you're trying to continue to listen without being deceitful about things,
Yeah, and then I'll say one thing real quickly, and then Stephanie. In the class from a few months ago, you can go back and watch this. Craig talked about keeping the main thing. So sharing the truth about the gospel. There's all kinds of things that might come up in conversations with people, relationships with people. It's not, we don't need to feel the pressure to correct every wrong thing that someone thinks or says or does. There's kind of some key things that we should kind of circle around and come back to over and over again about Christ and his gospel and those kinds of things. But we don't need to feel like it's our responsibility to ensure that this person knows exactly what's wrong with everything that they are about. Stephanie.
I forgot the question. Can you say it again?
What misunderstandings about empathy or showing empathy, sharing truth have you had?
I think I used to have this idea that to be faithful to Christ, I had to say what was capital T truth all the time. And then realizing it's a lot more nuanced and takes a lot more wisdom and time, and asking the Lord for help to know like when to open my big mouth and when not to, and that I'm not dishonoring him by loving somebody and earning the right to speak into their life. And that is just tricky because it's not like a formula. Like, oh, they said a wrong thing, so now I have to rebuttal. That's not how people work. Like when I was a non-believer, if somebody had done that to me, I would have been like, I don't want anything to do with you because you don't really care about me. You just want to say what you want to say.
So to kind of use Gracie's situation as an example, now it's her friend, so they have a relationship, but maybe someone you don't know all that well, for whatever reason, comes to you and talks about their struggle with jealousy. And you just kind of go, well, the reason you struggle with jealousy is because you're totally depraved and you're wicked and damned and you're just, an enemy of God, and your heart so twisted and corrupt. And so what comes out of it is all this ugliness, and you just kind of, yeah. All of those things are true, but perhaps you could share with them just some practical strategies for combating jealousy. And they may think, wow, that person's got some wisdom. I'm going to get to know them a bit more because they help me, which eventually could lead to, well, actually, here's why I know some of those, helps for jealousy is because I've struggled with jealousy, and God's word, says this. And, so what Stephanie was saying about capital T truth versus lowercase t truth, the first conversation doesn't need to go, Romans 3, total depravity. Anything else before we move on? All right. Let me talk about hospitality very briefly. I thought this would happen, that we'd spend most of our time on empathy and truth, and then just briefly touch on hospitality. And hospitality is kind of the context where empathy and truth can be practiced. So it's very difficult to be empathetic. It's very difficult to have a strong relationship where truth can be shared if there's never any time spent with others. So what do we mean by hospitality? Just very briefly, there's several commands in the New Testament to show hospitality to others. And in the context there, the hospitality is treating a stranger as a friend, or typically a stranger, not always. But, it's practical kindness exercised towards people who usually are not someone you're close with, not a family member, not a close friend. And it's often in the form of sharing meals, providing lodging, meeting urgent needs. Now, I'm just going to cover these two quickly and then go to some practical suggestions. But how can we show hospitality? This will relate to something I say in a moment about a practical suggestion. But we tend to think of hospitality, or many people tend to think of hospitality as like this big event that you put on, and it requires a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources. It can be just inviting people into your life in kind of the day-to-day things you already do, coffee break at work, and you and a coworker go and share a coffee together and get to know each other. Lunch together with others, a neighbor that, you know, likes to exercise the way you like to exercise, and so you run together or whatever. Sports, you know, usually a great way to meet people. You know, shared hobbies, carpooling with a coworker. You know, it's just things you're already doing anyway. You know, for me, I don't want to drive with another person to work. I would rather just be by myself. But you know, ways to invite people into your life. On the flip side, it can be going to others. You know, providing meals to a family going through difficult circumstances. Which, in that case, if we're talking about like literal neighbors, you know, people in your neighborhood, it goes back to that what we talked about earlier, time. Like, in order to know that they're going through something difficult, you would have had to spend time getting to know them, and then potentially, you know, getting to know them well enough that they would tell you that something big is going on. But let me make some practical, just a couple suggestions here. Keep it simple. If we're going to cultivate empathy and share truth and have that in the context of hospitality, we're going to have to keep the hospitality simple, or otherwise we'll avoid it. So that applies to cleaning your home. You know, your home does not need to be spotless in order to invite someone into it. Because you know what? Unless they are, you know, there are some rare exceptions, but their home is probably not spotless either. And they might be pleased to find out, like, oh, okay, you're kind of like me. Your home is not always in pristine condition. The meal does not need to be, you know, a 5-course, you know, 3-4 star meal. You know, it could be picking up fast food and eating it together or whatever. It could be dessert instead of a full-on meal. So it does not need to be the party of the year. In order to invite someone into your life, into your home, to be hospitable to them, it does not need to be the party of the year. Partner with others. So I know, you know, there's various reasons it could be difficult to do hospitality. Maybe it's a team effort, you know. You know, you have some event at your home, a barbecue at your home, and you're wanting to invite some of the neighbors you've been getting to know. But you're worried about, like, how am I going to how am I going to get to them all? Am I going to have enough to say? Invite some of your church friends to the same event. So that way there's a mix of people that at the event that can get to know your neighbors as well. Let me just finish with a couple questions for you. What are some of your biggest fears or hang-ups or roadblocks with hospitality? I can just do what I did before, share some of my own. Maybe it'll spark ideas. Too busy. You know, it's difficult. Don't know who to invite. Don't have the money. It could be expensive if you're, you know, providing meals for people. Don't have the space. You know, that Stephanie and I, we live in a very small place, and we've got a large family, and so it's difficult to have people there. What are some of your struggles, and/or how have you kind of overcome some of those difficulties with hospitality?
Realized that it's helpful that a lot of times you don't go, especially with a neighbor you don't know who's like not a Christian, and so you're already very weird. Just to realize that it's probably really weird to all of a sudden be invited over for dinner, and so small increments of that, of like you're outside, like we had the garage door open, and a conversation happened, but like trying to bring that conversation in casual ways into, oh, I could show you what's in my backyard, and they're not hooked for 3 hours and need to enjoy the food or something, you know. So the incremental hospitality.
That's a good point. We can get accustomed here at church. New person shows up at church, and it's kind of like, oh, invite them over for lunch that day. And some people might think it's weird. A lot of people probably won't, because we're church people. We're used to that kind of thing. Our homes today. Studies have been done about how 50 years ago, most homes had a front porch, and people kind of hung out in the front area of their yard, their home. And that allowed for just kind of, unplanned interaction with neighbors. Now things have moved to the back. And so our homes have become kind of these places of refuge and seclusion. And so our neighbors will probably think we're very strange, like we're salespeople or something, and we're trying to hook them. If we're like, hey, you want to come over for dinner? They're like, oh, no, I don't want to hear that pitch. So, yeah, I guess we need to be sensitive to that. Incremental. Sylvia, you got to use the microphone, though.
You up for it?
Something really fun my neighbors just did casually that works perfectly is we live in a cul-de-sac, and then if we're cooking and we have extra, we'll bring out just a picnic, like a table, very basic foodware, and we'll invite everybody like, hey, you want to have some, salad? And then they'll run out and bring some more. And so anyhow, it could just be something really casual outside.
Yeah, so you're already making the food. And
Yeah. And I'll add one more thing. One thing I personally struggle, and I love having people at the house, but I don't feel very confident as a cook. And then when people have specific dietary needs, it started making me feel really overwhelmed. And so then I began to announce and to say, hey, if you have special, like I would ask, but if you have special needs, and then I would maybe ask if, hey, you could maybe bring something that's good for you, because it was overwhelming to try to create a menu that would, that was new to me and I wasn't used to it.
yeah, it's reasonable to ask people to bring something. We're out of time, so I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna pray, but again, you can go back and watch the week 8 that goes in, weeks 7 and 8 that go into these things in more detail. I encourage you to do that and keep thinking about this. So let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we want to grow as people who are marked by empathy and sharing truth in a loving way. Lord, would you help us to cultivate these habits? Would you help us to be a church and individuals who are known for being listeners, known for being kind and loving, but also people who are truthful and have convictions, but know how to share those in wise and loving ways. And Lord, would you also work in us to overcome whatever fears or hang-ups we have about inviting others into our lives. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.